Learning to fix knitting mistakes in a way that doesn't require you to rip back entire rows of knitting is an important skill. Diagnosing what happened to cause the error is another important skill because it helps you to understand how the loops on one row are connected to the loops on another. In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate the basic technique of laddering down a column of stitches in order to correct a mistake from a previous row, and then I'll take that technique one step further by diagnosing a common error and explaining how that error affected the appearance of the surrounding fabric. If you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, you can tap or mouse over the video playback area of your screen to reveal the chapter titles and starting points of each section. This is a stockinette fabric, and there is a purl stitch right here that shouldn't be in the fabric. So the way that we fix this stitch, when you have a single stitch that is a problem, that's a couple of rows below the needle, it could be many rows below the needle, you can use this technique. Okay, I've knit those two stitches, and now I need to take this stitch off the needle. I'm going to let it come off the needle. Do not panic. This is not something that you need to panic about. So I'm going to take a crochet hook, just the blunt end of a crochet hook, and I'm going to help release each of those stitches. You see that there's a long strand of yarn. We call this laddering down because it creates a ladder. It's like when you get a run in the old days when we wore pantyhose, a run in the pantyhose. So you can see I've taken this last one out, and this strand is in front because it had been purled. So we can just move this to the back of the work. I'm going to use this crochet hook. I'm using a crochet hook that's just a little bit smaller than my needles. So I want to come through this stitch from front to back. I want to make sure that this is not twisted. So you can see that the right leg of the stitch is the one that's connected this way. So I'm just going to stick my crochet hook through that loop. And then I'm going to look at those three strands that I have above. I want to make sure that I'm pulling the lowest strand through that loop. So in order to use a crochet hook to do that, I tend to need to turn the hook as I'm pulling it through, like that. And I just do that. I make sure that each time I'm grabbing the lowest rung on that ladder as I chain my way back up. And then I want to put it back on my needle so that it is sitting on the needle correctly. And the way it needs to sit on the needle in Western knitting is so that this leg that is sitting in front is the one that is connected to the stitch on the right. And this then allows me to continue knitting across. The next error is down here in the fabric. This stitch has a leg that's kind of lying above the surface. That stitch is twisted at the base. You can see how it's twisted at the base. And if we look at the back side, what we can see is that there is a strand going across. There's a horizontal strand. So the error occurred when the stitch was entered as if to knit, and then the working yarn didn't get wrapped correctly around the needle, and the stitch ended up just getting slipped. And so that remounted the stitch on the needle. And then on the next row, when it was worked through that leg that's on the front of the needle, and that caused the twisting. Now, some knitters would notice, oh, this is not sitting on the needle the way it's supposed to, and they would enter it the correct way, but it would still end up being a slipped stitch because it had never been worked on the previous row. So for this column of stitches, we do the same thing. We work across the row until we get to that column of stitches where the error occurs. And then I need to let this off the needle. And I ladder down until I get to that twisted stitch. So now what you can see is that this strand going across here is actually quite a bit shorter than these, and that's because it just took a direct route. It never was wrapped around the working needle, and so this is a shorter strand in the ladder. But once again, we want to look at this stitch down here. We want to make sure that when we work this stitch that it is not twisted. So put your crochet hook on there and make sure that it's not twisted. You can see that the left leg is connected to the stitch on the left. And we just ladder up in the same way. But again, this is going to be a shorter rung to pull through because it had been accidentally slipped. Again, I'm always looking to make sure I'm catching the lowest rung in the ladder. I get my way back up to the top, and I want to make sure that I get this stitch on my left-hand needle in the correct orientation. So I'm putting it on the needle so that the right leg is the one that comes over the front of the needle. The big benefit of laddering down to fix an error is that it allows you to correct a simple error without having to reknit the surrounding fabric. There's no risk of introducing new errors into the fabric, which can happen when reknitting. If you like the idea of laddering down a single column, you might love the idea of laddering down a span of stitches where an error affects 2 or more adjacent stitches. You can find videos on that technique in my Fixing Mistakes playlist. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.